Hi, everyone. I recently sat down with James Mills. He's the founder and editor in chief of The Arcanist. It's a magazine that publishes short works of fantasy literature by whoever submits it and gets accepted. And technically, I wasn't sitting down, I was standing as I always am when I'm talking, but he was sitting down. And from our respective postures, we had a really long conversation about publishing. Mostly, I'm just interviewing him as he has a unique behind the scenes perspective of some of the ins and outs, some ups and downs, some sidewayses of fantasy publishing. And so if you're looking into publishing your own work, either here or elsewhere, you'll probably learn something. Or if you just want to hang out with us for the next hour, you're welcome to do that too. Here's our conversation.
Because you have particular life experiences that I'm interested in. And I think a lot of people are. Let's just have this be the introduction. So, hi, everyone. This is James Mills. Some viewers have surely seen his channel before. Some people, viewers of mine came from your channel, and hopefully some viewers of mine will go to your channel in return when these start to post. But you have published so far these two volumes of The Arcanist. I love the logo. Can I ask how you came with the logo?
So I can't take much credit. I had drawn up a very childish blocky A with a wizard hat on it, and I put that through Adobe's AI stuff, and I couldn't find anything that fit the vibe. So Lee Patton, his wife, is an artist, and so he's like, I can just ask her to do it. And so she did, and she turned it in. It was just a scan from Kinko's on paper, and then I was able to take that into Adobe Illustrator and turn it into something workable.
Nice. Yeah, so I'm just going to do a little close up of the logo. I could just like take a picture and edit in the picture. But I like that you had a human being do it for this final version. That it's a person's illustration. So you have these two different books, and I haven't gotten into the second one. I'm still in the winter 2025. The second one maybe is a little bit longer, but the winter one, it's right over 100 pages. I think it's 14 contributing writers. So that gives readers, potential readers, some insight about how long each story is. But part of what makes it so interesting is they're all so different. I mean, it begins with like obviously the table of contents and that like disclaimer. It's almost like it's a legal liability disclaimer. Any names that may be similar to however you phrase it. So that's very legal in the publication. But in the very end, there's a breakdown of all of the contributors. I think it's 14 of them, and they're so diverse. There's a couple people who teach. There's a lawyer in there. There's a pianist. Someone's talking English in like four different countries or something.
Yeah.
I think one of your editors came from the Netherlands over to the U.S.
Yes.
And there's so much diversity of background that's contributed. Like one person was a poet in like Thailand or something for 20 years, or maybe still is. I'm not sure. But the diversity of now I've only read a few of them. I read yours. Is it pronounced Menke, Menke?
Yeah, Menke.
Menke. I read that one. I read the very first one, which I think that person has a PhD in English or literature or creative writing or something. It looks almost like an E. E. Cummings kind of poem. I mean, just the very
Mhm.
first one, but it's written as a story. It's not. I mean, it has these like 6 line stanzas, but they continue like the story continues. It almost has this E. E. Cummings kind of structure. But every one of these is so different. The next one I have queued up is the one that your aunt wrote. So that one's I have
Yeah,
bookmarked. That's the next one I'm going to read because I think that one's going to be very different probably from the rest.
it is. That one is. Have you ever read C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce?
No.
It's very similar in concept to that, but the story to that one, that was actually the story that made me want to start that magazine. I was going through my undergrad and my first serious writing class, the teacher had altered the normal curriculum and said no genre fiction, only literary fiction. Like, I don't have anything against genre, but you need to understand this if you're going to succeed as a short story author. And that ended up being very true for me. It might be different for other people, but I was trying to think in my head, how can literary fiction that is really concerned with the growth of a character blend with fantasy? And I've come to a lot of conclusions, and my thoughts on that are still evolving as to, literally a few hours ago. But that's where the name, the Literary Fantasy Magazine, comes from. And the first story I saw doing that exact thing was my aunt's story, Final Offering, in that first issue. I begged her to let me publish it. I said, please let me put this into print and share this with the world. And I think it stands up even if you don't know the background behind it. But my mother had died of brain cancer in 2022, and my aunt was there with us through it all. She was taking weeks and weeks off of work, flying up to Stockton from LA, and I spent a lot of that's when we got very close, was after my mom died, and I discovered that she was a writer. I didn't know. Like, I didn't know a
Now,
lot of my
what was
family.
she planning on doing with this piece? And was she writing for an audience? Was she publishing, or was she just accumulating her? Like Leonardo da Vinci wrote his entire life, and nobody saw really any of his writings still after he died. Uh, was she doing something like that, where she's just accumulating kind of journals and stories, or was she sending it places?
It was definitely a personal project. The character is a stand-in for herself, and then dealing with her sister, the character's sister's death, which directly translates to her experience with my mother. So it had a lot of personal meaning to me and to her, as obviously. Um, but man, I don't cry often, and it's definitely because I have that personal connection. But even when I was editing it, and I'd already read the story, I already knew how it ended, it got me to cry twice, and I can't give that credit to really anything. I think even if you don't know that story, I love it so much. I think it stands up to the test of time for sure. It's a very important tale that deals a lot with grief that clearly I have a lot of personal stake in.
Now I'm more excited to read it. I mean, excited maybe isn't the right word to read something with sort of somber tones, but I'm more interested. When we get off our call, I will sit down and read that one. But what you say about literary fiction, that's really all I'm interested in. I have a hard time with genre fiction. 9 out of 10 books for me, I make it 30, 40, maybe 50 pages in, and I just can't keep going because it's just genre fiction. Whereas stories where nothing happens, but it's you really the deep dive into the human condition. I'll reread those. I'll read them start to finish. Wait a month, and I'll start it over again, and I'll finish it the second time. I mean, some of those books I've read 8 times. And so, literary fiction, to that's what has always connected with me. And I feel like there's a shortage of it. This is just my opinion, right? I'm not stating facts here, but I feel like fantasy really goes for the genre tropes. Like, okay, that was a cool battle scene, but did I learn anything about life and examining life and living a better one? Like, not much. So I really like your angle. There's a range of topics, a range of writing styles. Even as I was reading the Menke, how is it pronounced?
Yeah,
Menke.
Menke HB is
Okay.
the pen name.
There were a couple. I mean, I noticed in the writing as it started, because it doesn't just tell you like, well, they're dragons, so they're talking, they wanted to hum, but the scales are like, okay, so we're in something, lizard like, and then it's like, oh, then there's this no fly tag. Okay, we're winged lizards. I'm thinking dragons, and eventually it reveals dragons. So structurally, I thought that was a really sound one.
What I loved about it was that it's a story about dragons, but it's really about family. It's
Hmm.
about taking care of that parental instinct to take care of a child you found abandoned on the side of the road.
Yeah, I mean, happens to be a baby dragon, but
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's what I am really looking for. So clearly, after I accepted that for publication, I said, "Hey, you should really come on here and be an editor."
Yeah.
So
Okay. So can we talk about the magazine itself? And I have the some concept of where it came from. You're reading your aunt's work, and you get this inspiration. But you have an LLC. You have a couple of people who work. There's a reader and like a selection reader and an editor, and then yourself. And it obviously involves solicitation of writers, recruitment of
Mhm.
writers. There's a whole publication process. distribution, you have a website. Will you walk me through
Yeah,
this?
absolutely. So, the thing that you have to understand about literary magazines is most of them are pretentious and annoying, and they don't want to publish anybody twice. They don't want anything but the best possible writing that adheres to their very particular specifications to the point of absurdity. Some of these magazines I've seen, they're like, I want stories that poke the coffee drinking soul with a guava leaf. What does that mean? Tell me what you want me to write. I
Yeah,
can't.
there's
Um,
familiar bells being rung in the scientific community with particular journals. But all right, go on.
yeah. So with the Arcanist, like I said, it began with those family roots. The first story I was ever professionally interested in was my aunt's. And so we do publish from within. A lot of our content is written in-house. Um, I took me a long time to wrangle with that because up until that point, going through my creative writing program, getting into the publishing scene through the lens of literary fiction, this was a downside to that approach, is literary fiction has a reputation of being a little bit, holier than thou. So a lot of magazines won't allow their staff to submit writing, where I encourage it. Particularly, it's because so we're doing a strange blend. There's only one other established publication that does something even similar to what we're doing. Um, and I think that'd be Beneath Ceaseless Skies. They're very interested in character concerned fantasy, where mine is defined by character driven narrative, but we're also more open to just things that literary fiction can take a lot of risks that genre fiction typically can't. It can be experimental, it can be artistic in ways that trope driven genre just isn't. And so that's what I encourage. I want things I haven't read before a million times, and it doesn't necessarily have to adhere to a strict definition. So the reason why we do staff publication is because we're trying to create a new literary movement in fantasy that doesn't really exist in the mainstream. If you look up literary fantasy, you're going to find my magazine. You're not going to find anything else. You can't go to Amazon and select it in the subcategory. I know that I've won in my battle against the world when you go to Amazon and there's a selection of literary fantasy to pick. Not that anything that actually is would be in there, because that's a whole nother discussion. But then at the same time, while we're publishing from within, I solicit a lot of writing from writers that I'm familiar with, most of them have originated as contributors that um, do, like I call it cold calling, but it's when you query without being asked to. That's mostly what the short fiction market does. It's also what happens with books, but usually an agent would be doing that on your behalf. Short fiction, there's very few magazines where you'd have to need an agent to do that for you. So I prefer working with people that I'm familiar with, but at the same time, the secondary goal to the publishing effort is I want new writers. I don't just want new writers, I want new writers who are going to grow and improve through the
Mm.
editorial process. We have an internal project. We don't use it for marketing or anything like that, but it will kind of privately select certain stories. Most magazines look for stories that are so polished that they have to do almost no editorial. And a lot of mainstream things, like if you look at the New Yorker or Clark's World they have so many submissions, you can't blame them for that. They're where I'm getting maybe 20 to 30 a month, they're getting 20 to 30 an hour.
Okay.
It's insanity. But because we're relatively niche, we don't draw in dozens of submissions per hour. We can spend more time with people and helping to develop them. So, of course, I prioritize stories that I don't have to do a whole lot of work for, especially for print. But I also have the online publication, which right now this whole year we've been able to do a story every other week, and we're booked out through December, which is
Wow,
huge
that is
because in
huge.
the entirety of 2024 we only had four submissions go up, where now it's every other week consistently.
That's huge already.
hmm And what's great about being so far out is that I don't have to worry about maybe we don't have one this month. Like they're going to show up, they're going to come
Right.
in. And a part of that is because of our internal, we call it the story mentor program. And it's when there's a story, especially from a newer writer, but it could be anybody. There's people who've been writing for a long time that haven't done any sort of formal training, they don't have much of a community, and they've never had a publisher like sit down with them and explain to them what's going wrong with their writing. The form rejection is the most common, if you get a response at all. So when one of these stories comes in and it has to be a really good idea and the concept really needs to ring with me, it needs to be unique, something that we haven't really done before, or a sort of moral message or some narrative that I find important for whatever reason. And then maybe the author's command of language just isn't there. Maybe they're doing a lot of telling and not a lot of showing. They haven't learned the balance. What I found too is sometimes authors, they don't know how to pull back and pull in.
Mm,
Sometimes you really need to zoom in on a moment. Sometimes you need to pull out and let a few years go by. It all depends on the narrative and what the actual narrative beats are calling for. But that's when we sit down and we're like, okay, we're going to publish this to the website. And I always let the authors know, if you're wondering if you're a story mentor, it's when I give you a disclaimer about how intense the editorial is going to be. That's when I do a full developmental edit. Usually before that, before the submission has even been accepted, I have sent an email saying I would like to publish this, but I cannot for X, Y, and Z reason. If you address these problems and revise your manuscripts and send it back to me, I will reconsider. 9 times out of 10, I accept those submissions. It's very rare when the revision isn't enough for me to see merit. That's very important because this shows me that the writer stands by their work and they're willing to put in more work to improve it. If I or any other editor sends you an email telling you how you can improve your story and you say, it's perfect, there is nothing I can do to help you. There is no force in this world that will get you published at that point.
right. Yeah, this
Um,
also sounds familiar to the scientific. There's a few different responses you would get when you submit a paper for publication to whatever journal. One of them is reject. One of them is revise and resubmit, but it's minor, and the other one's revise with major revisions. If you get either revise, you're going to eventually be published if you try. If you try and you address them, there's a destination that you're going to be happy with. Now, it may be a bumpier road. If it's revise and resubmit with major revisions, you're probably going to resubmit it, and the next time around it's going to say minor revisions, and the next time it's going to be accepted. But that's the course. That's the course people follow. And it sounds like it's the same thing here, where there's an absolute reject, where this is just sort of unpublishable thematically or whatever it is, whatever the exclusion criterion is. But if you're getting a revise and resubmit message, then it's a matter of work ethic, it's a matter of care, it's a matter of attention that's going to ultimately result in publication.
yes. And it does work because those people that I've taken that extra effort onto, and those are not easy editorials, where most manuscripts might be getting about 100 suggested edits. These ones could have upwards of 1,000.
Okay.
And it's a lot of back and forth, a lot of collaboration where, a normal story would take a day or two for me to do a primary edit. These could take an entire month, but they're absolutely worth it because the writer comes out better for that experience. And I've had them return to the magazine, and one of those writers that initially had one of those revision requests went through my rigorous editorial process, started sending in follow-ups to that story that are now being compiled into a book we're publishing.
Oh,
So this,
wow. Okay.
yeah, it works when you put in the work and you listen to your editors, and that doesn't mean say yes to everything I tell you, but what it does mean is listen to the feedback and learn how to apply that to improve your craft.
Mm.
Suddenly, we've gone from a story that I almost rejected to a book that I'm publishing over the course of a year. Uh, that
I-
is the best part of what I do.
Okay, can we start with your LLC? Now this was after you moved to Indiana, you started it?
Yeah. So
Okay.
the Arcanist has been around since about 2019. It started as
As an
my
LLC or as a project that later became an LLC?
the latter
Okay.
was a project first, and then I registered it officially in January of 2025.
And what's it called? It's the Arcanist is your LLC. That's the name of it.
Yeah, the Arcanist Fantasy Publishing LLC
Okay.
is the entity, and
Okay.
we actually began. I guess I have to provide the naming took a while to solidify because 2019 to about 2022, the Arcanist's Refuge was my game design freelance thing, and that's where I did my
Okay.
typesetting contracts. It's where I published a bunch of D&D supplements, and then when my mom got sick, that all kind of I couldn't keep up with the projects
Mhm.
anymore, and it that practice fell apart. And then around 24, Lee Patton and I had met in school because I was putting out the feelers for people who might be able to help me with the magazine. And then we decided to create something. I loved the name The Arcanist. I had this idea, you have
That's
The
a
New
good.
Yorker,
Yeah.
the Times. So I have The Arcanist because that's like I feel like that would be a publication in a fantasy wizardly
Yeah, it
world.
works. That one works.
Yes. Uh, and so it started out as the Arcanist Literary Fantasy Magazine. And that quickly proved problematic because the Arcanist Fantasy Magazine had been a thing about 7 years ago that existed for a few years.
Okay, but also it sounds like you have a wider set of goals because if you're publishing people's books, it's not just a literary magazine, right? So that's
Exactly.
part of it. That's one facet of your business, but then there are other facets. You're publishing your books and other people's books.
Yeah, that
I,
all came
I want
later.
to be, I want to ask a bunch. I don't want to lead the conversation away from your train of thought, but how you go about, I mean, the ISBNs, how you go about prioritizing projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Publishing other people's books came about as a necessity because I had to publish my own books. Part of the impetus of why I started my own publishing practice was I had done some market research for a class in the publishing industry, and I looked through the writers market at all these fantasy publishers that I could try to query without an agent. Really, there's only Tor and Del Rey, and you
Okay.
need an agent for both. I wasn't interested in trying to find an agent for various reasons, and all those smaller companies, I looked into them and I just didn't want my work anywhere near them. I just wasn't proud of what other things they were putting out, and I thought I could do it better.
Okay.
It's kind of a arrogant thought, but so far it's proving to be true. Fast forward to now, we're running the magazine, which is a whole mess of its own. Definitely not a casual side project. But then I'm also working with three authors who are external who have come in from various means. Two of them were magazine contributors, and another one was somebody that I had met through a mutual friend that I then negotiated with for several months to eventually come to a conclusion of I'm publishing your next book. And then the other two authors are myself and Lee Patton, and we're, kind of the dynamic duo behind this whole thing. So, where I used to have my hands in everything, I very recently have now handed the literary fantasy magazine's management over to Lee Patton.
Okay.
He has a very strong understanding of short fiction beyond that of my own, and he was like the driving creative force behind it as like he was an equal half to those first two issues. Um, he won't ever admit it, but I would not have been able to do those two magazines without his help. So where before basically we'd be getting in all the submissions and then I'd have readers go through, curate ones to forward to us, and I would review every one that got marked accepted by a reader. Now all those things are being handled by Lee. So whatever Lee says yes to, now I get an even smaller pool that get
That's
forwarded to
helpful.
me for final approval.
Yeah.
As far as denial, it is important to me that we provide feedback to people, but that's not always possible. For example, I have about 25 rejection emails I need to send out right now. I can't give feedback to all of those people.
Mhm.
So usually you can tell when a writer actually put an effort to a submission. That's what I prioritize for, that personal touch is like if you took the time to know the names of the people you're submitting to, if you understand what this magazine is, if you really put a lot of effort into your writing, I will send you a more personalized message and try to give you some feedback in a way forward instead of just a blank wall of negativity. But then there are also those writers that don't know our names, don't even bother. Half the time, it's not even fantasy they're submitting. We only publish fantasy. A lot of people see fantasy and they think sci-fi and horror. No, that's every other
Totally
speculative
different.
fiction
Yeah.
magazine, not us. We're
Yeah.
only swords, dragons, and historical and magic.
Yeah.
There's a lot of we do a lot of different things, but there's strict no science fiction, no thriller, none of the other genres. Uh, there's also just people who submit things that are written with, I'll say, less than good intentions. Those are usually not getting the light of day.
So less than good intentions, is this like putting political ideologies into it, or it's just graphic for, graphic's sake, or what um, sort of quantify our intentions? Explain the intentions here.
It's subjective, but what I look for is if was it because it's not like we won't publish difficult topics. We do, absolutely, and we encourage it. But if you're going to include something controversial or upsetting, then the goal should be to further your understanding of that topic or to e e expand upon it in a constructive way. Where it breaks down is when it is put in for the sake of upsetting the reader.
Okay.
That could be politics. Often for us, it's needless sexual content or gore. Um, Sexual content is kind of a gray area because a lot of popular fantasy
All
has
the
borderline
romanticy of
pornographic
wrestling and
scenes.
all this stuff. I'm so uninterested in all of that. So
Yeah.
all it is sensationalism, I think, for sensationalism's sake, and there's no content, there's no substance to that stuff. I mean, I feel
Yeah.
like George R. R. Martin did okay, but I think, in my estimation, in my reading, A Song of Ice and Fire would be better without all the sex and and violence. Is that I feel like it could have been improved if some of that were cut.
Yeah. And everybody's tastes are different, but what it comes down to for me with that kind of stuff, like especially sexual content, it's like do you really need to get into every movement to express why these people feel a connection to each other?
Hmm.
There are more subtle artistic ways to do that, and literary fantasy, literary fiction is all about the subtlety. Um,
Right.
you know, it all depends on how it's presented. If and it depends on how on the perceived intention of the author, whether or not we're interested in those things. But typically, if it's over the top, it's not our audience. It's not our interest.
Right.
Uh, Pivoting over to the book side of things, most of those are solicited by me. It's often, especially on the online publication, I'm soliciting from authors that I know, and I say, "Hey, we've worked together a bunch of times. Do you have any?" I actually just did this the other day. We have a shortage of poems for our issue 3. We only have one poem. We need five at least. And so I reached out to a poet that's worked with us in the past that I know writes poems like crazy. And I said, "Do you have poems available?" And he sent me five.
Okay.
And I
So
took three of them.
okay.
Um,
So are you going to publish all three, or are you just taking three and working through them to figure out which is the appropriate one?
I will be publishing three. Usually we're a little bit more picky, but when it comes to poetry is in short supply in our submissions. I've been asking for it in our writer's newsletter every month for about the last 6 months, and like I said, I've only gotten that one submission that made it through. And if any of your viewers watching now write fantasy or write and want to try your hand at fantasy, if you've always wanted, this is what I say in my newsletter, if you've always wanted to try poetry, but you don't know where to start and you're kind of like afraid of pitching to those hoity-toity poetry journals, submit it to us because we need it. And we'll actually work with you if you have a good enough concept. We'll work with you and develop you further. We're not just going to send you off to the wolves without, any food or explanation for how to build a fire.
Yeah, that's what the New Yorker would do.
Oh yeah.
If you submit something to them, okay, if you don't hear back from us, that means you're rejected. I mean, that's
Yes.
the classic kind of New Yorker approach. But okay, so I know a lot of these magazines have shut down open submissions because of AI. Maybe, some of these periodicals were receiving, 2,000 submissions a year, and now they're receiving 2,000 a minute, and none of them are written by humans. How do you manage that? And have you not encountered this problem yet? Are you vetting the writers themselves? Are you just reading carefully? And if it's just obvious that this is not written by, human anatomy, human hands, human heart, human brain, then what is your process and your plan to deal with this if it escalates in the future?
So I wouldn't be worried about it escalating. The great thing about writing is that it does not pay well, and they are starting to figure that out.
Okay.
This was a huge problem in about 2023. I was attending a panel in Florida with the editor-in-chief of Asimov Science Fiction magazine, and when I asked a very similar question, what she told me was, and at the time, for context, what was happening in 23 is what you just said. There were magazines that had never closed submissions in their history that had to close because they had received too many submissions from AI, from people sending slop. She told me not to worry about being blacklisted by mistake or something like that, because if your writing is to a quality where the editor believes it was written by AI, you have bigger problems than being blacklisted from a magazine.
That's a good way of putting it.
But I have seen that. It's not common, and one of the things that I probably an irrational fear is that I've accidentally accepted one that was written by AI, but I think that's just self-doubt. But I have caught people red-handed. A lot of times we don't really know. It just gets naturally rejected by the submission reader
Okay.
because they're like, this wasn't good. So
Right.
they don't think anything twice about it. They say, nope, not a pick. We never see it. I had one AI chatter, who actually did a good job at presenting himself like a writer. Um, he was writing cover letters, or at least
Generating
giving
cover letters.
generating one with and putting our names in there, doing a little bit of extra research. And so the first time his submission came through, it was that natural rejection process where it was like somebody had said, this reads more like creative nonfiction, doesn't really have a fantastical element. I'm going to say no. And so I carried that message over and said, this isn't really our thing, but, submit again. So he did. And the second submission so the first one, and I'm gonna go ahead and just say what the titles were because this isn't real work that somebody put their effort into. The first one was like The Day My Mother Forgot My Name. The second one was The Day I Turned Invisible.
Okay, so it's just the same thing.
It's the same thing. It was I read it, I remember reading it and I was like, this is the same concept. What is
Just
going on
fed it
here?
into ChatGPT and said, make this more fantastical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much. There was like a
There's so little
thrown in
dignity in
approaching
some
a
people.
cave.
Say that again.
Oh, here you repeat yourself first.
Oh, all I said was criticism. It's just there's so little dignity. If I were to do something like that, I would just cringe about my own life for the rest of my life. I mean, there's integrity or dignity, call it whatever you want. Behaving in that way is just so, I don't know, it's so pathetic that like how could anybody live with themselves for
Yeah.
cheating in that way. I just don't understand the human psyche that would be so mutated to cheat in that way and kind of sleep at night or not just have this like seizure of a cringe for the next 20 years.
Yeah, I don't understand the mentality myself. When I finally reached out to him, I said, and usually I don't respond. I'll just block their email, but this guy had been talking to me. He was following up and like checking on his submission. And so I said, if you
How can I ask how old this person was, ballpark, or do you have no idea?
I believe he was in his early 20s or
Okay.
coming out of high school. So the tells with these things, um, oh, but I encouraged him to learn how to write because he'd actually probably get published by somebody if he just learned how to write a story on his own instead of gambling on these. Anyway, the tells with them usually they'll be a flash fiction length of 1,000 words, and then those flash fictions will be cut into chapters. Uh, because if you're using a more advanced model, you can get a whole story out of it. But most of these people, what they're doing is they live in somewhere out of the Western part of the world, and they are probably struggling and they need money in the quickest, fastest way possible. Kind of the similar to people who call you with the scam calls, like they're
Right.
making
I get
pennies on the
20 of them today.
dollar. Um, so it's the same type of person doing that usually, and they'll just use the free model of ChatGPT, and that's really good at pumping out flash fiction. Bad flash fiction, but it can do it cost effectively to where they don't have any
Yeah, cost
upfront
effectively
cost.
for them, opportunity cost for everyone else in the world. How could
Oh yeah.
you have spent those hours not reading something that nobody actually wrote? You could have, even if it was just, I'm gonna nap during this time. I'm just gonna take a nap, I'm gonna recover, and then I'll focus on something later. That's so much better use of your time than reading slop, or reading these AI generated things that no person actually wrote. The one thing that you acknowledge about this person is they learned everyone's names. They learned a little about the company and the goals of it. That's so important no matter what. So people will apply to Pacific and we go through this long interview process. And if somebody is applying for the job to be a professor and I sit down with them and they don't know who I am or what my lines of research are, the interview's over. And they're like, because someone else is going to come in and say, I read your paper on this, and then immediately that person is in a totally different category. And so why am I even interviewing the person who just shows up oblivious to the status of the university and its employees? If you haven't done some reconnaissance work, don't show up to the war. You know?
Hmm.
And it's the same thing with your magazine, where if people aren't learning about the mission, you and the editors and what you're looking for and reading past work to see if what kinds of things get accepted, they have no business submitting. I think that's just true in everything ever. The
It can
reconnaissance
be
work is 80% of the journey. Let's just call it 30% of the journey. It's an important slice.
it absolutely is. The worst way to start a cover letter if you're submitting writing is to say dear editor. At least put the name of the publication. Some publications don't advertise who's running them, and so but name the magazine. Um, I understand as a writer, I'm frustrated when magazines like ask you to read the previous issues. But
Yeah, but
caveat,
glancing familiar, I mean, you don't have to dissect every single one of them, but the type of person, the type of writer who's submitting, who has gone through that effort, it's hard not to give them uh, I don't more credibility than the people
yes,
who haven't.
the people who do go through that extra effort, because I've gotten letters of people who have read my work or who have read other things from the magazine. That says a lot about that person. At the same time, those magazines that tell you just read our previous issue, what they're not doing is giving you a detailed description of what they want in their
Right.
submission guidelines. So I do that. You don't need to have read the Arcanist magazine at all. If you read the submission guidelines, you're going to be perfectly prepared to publish something we want. In fact, I think I'd prefer people who haven't read it as much because then we're going to get more diverse stories rather than something kind of trying to mimic a pre-established formula. But reading, if you do want to read it, there's also a thing in the guidelines for the Arcanists. While we have our free stories, we also have the things we print that typically have to be paid for. Um, I don't think that we're in a position to provide the issues for free. But when an author emails us, there's instructions on how to do this in the guidelines. You email us and ask us for access to the archive, I will then give you a private website that has everything I've ever published in the Arcanist, and you
Like
can read
PDF
any of it.
form in there.
It's just a normal website, so it's an archive,
Okay.
and you can search up specific authors, you can search up names, and it's very slick and easy to use. Um, and so my goal in submissions is to put as little barrier as possible to the writer. Most of that barrier for other magazines is the abstract descriptions of their taste.
Hmm.
Because I don't know what the essence of guava is and what that applies to fiction.
Yeah.
But I do know what a character-driven narrative is, and I know what fantasy is, and so I could probably think on a few ways I could squeeze those things together and make them happen. Um,
Okay. So on the topic of making it happen, when you're publishing the magazine, I mean, these are beautiful between the cover design and I like that the one that you wrote in here brings out whenever you're watching some TV show or movie or something, and then you kind of hear the name of the movie in like, oh that, or even
yeah.
you're reading a book and like that's why it's titled that. Your story brings the cover to life, but there are a lot of steps in going to print. Let's say you've received everyone's submissions. What do you do? I mean, is this Word? Is this some other editing software? And how do you print and distribute? Like, what are your resources here? How do you go about it?
So there's a lot of steps, and I'll do my best to kind of give a quick overview. There's probably a better way to do this, but this is my way of doing it that I have now taught other people. And once you get other people trained on your weirdness that you do, it's hard to roll back. Um, so it starts in Google Docs. Our submission form, you upload your manuscript to Google, and it goes into a Google Sheet that everybody in the on the staff has access to. From there, we can very easily just pull up your manuscript. When we accept something and we put it into the editing queue, the first thing we do is we have to get a agreement. So it's not a complex contract, and most magazines do this, and if they're not doing it, they should because it protects both entities. Basically, it just says the Arcanist Fantasy Publishing has the first print rights and indefinite archival rights. What that means is I'm printing it first, and I get to put it on my Internet Archive. You retain IP and copyright, and if you publish it somewhere else, you just have to give us credit for doing it first. A lot of magazines will take an exclusive license for a period of time. You could publish with us, and the next day put it somewhere else as long as it says it was in the magazine first. We also need permission. That's a duotrope thing where that was the first place we listed our submissions, and duotrope requires that you obtain a definite permission. Um, Sometimes writers don't understand that, and I have to take their signed contract as implied permission. I don't think they're policing it that much, but as a new LLC, I dot my I's and cross my T's. Once we have that, we move it into the editing queue, and this is where it used to all be me, but now I have a team of 7 people, so I can assign and deliberate as I need to. Uh, we let the author know what's going to happen. So there will be a primary edit, which would, if necessary, start with a developmental edit. This is where we're providing specific feedback on narrative movement. This ending doesn't work for this reason. These paragraphs should be switched around. We should present these narrative beats in different ways. Most stories don't need that outside of the story mentor program. That's a lot more common in the book side of things because those are just way bigger projects, but short fiction tends to be very polished. Um, then we do a copy edit, which is mostly what the primary edit will consist of. This is when in Google Docs, I have it in suggestion mode. And it's like when you're turning in a paper to a professor, they use their colored pen to
Hmm.
cross out words or whatever. That's that in digital form. And then the author can review it and say yes or no to everything. And I always tell them, you have creative control. Accept, deny, or argue with me as you wish. I usually take the author's lead. If there's something that I feel very strongly about, I will put up my best argument that I can. But then if they still don't want to do it, it's their writing. I accepted it. You accept it as is as a publisher. You
Right.
can suggest things all you want, but it's their writing and they can take it elsewhere if you don't like what they're doing. Um, After that happens, then it's still in Google Docs, and I send it to the proofreader, who is always a different editor from the primary editor. I also call the proofread a secondary edit because sometimes it goes a little bit beyond the limits of a proofread. Um, this will usually be handled privately and without author input unless major changes are being suggested that are more similar to a copy edit. If it's just a typo or formatting thing, I'm not going to waste your time with it. But if it's like we're changing a word and it can create lexical ambiguity where there was none before, then we're going to send it to you and be like, are you okay with this
Right.
change? Um, After the proofread is done, then it gets saved and converted over to docx to be in Microsoft Word. This is where I do my formatting. I don't care what the font is. I don't care how big it is. None of those things matter. What matters is that there aren't extra paragraphs or tabs inside the document, because those are actually hidden characters within the document. Like if you hit an I key, you'll see the I, but if you hit tab, what there really is a spacer that's getting injected into the code work of the document that is gonna mess things up later.
Okay.
So I assign, it's very simple. We do a header one, header two, so that'd be title, name of author, and then body text with italics and bold and any of those extra character styles. And then I save that as is, and I put those into a working folder with each story or chapter, if it's a book, being separated by their um, separated in different documents. That's when I move over to Adobe InDesign, where I have already developed my templates and I can very easily start laying it out nicely on the page, putting in the art, getting all the font
Yeah,
looking
you
good.
have there. I think there are seven um, artworks in
Yes.
internal artworks, and they're all consistent. I want to ask about those too because it all looks like they were maybe done by the same person or within the same style at least if they're done by different people.
Yes. Art is one of the biggest barriers to creative works, especially when you're getting out of fiction and going more into things like game design or, God forbid, comics. If you're not an artist, you're going to have a hard time. Working in game design, I became very crafty with licensing. So most of the art that you'll see on my websites in the Arcanist, it comes from an artist named Kim Holm, and he's very, very successful on TikTok. His whole thing is for a long time as he did these daily little ink monsters with pen and ink. His whole brand is to free art, make it available to people who need it. So he has his entire selection, at least I don't know if it's everything he's ever done, but it is a ridiculous amount of images up on his SmugMug store that you can download for free with commercial licensing and it's in Creative
Okay.
Commons.
Okay. So you just cite him and there's no cost.
Yep. Yeah, as long
Okay.
as
Oh,
his
so it is just
signature,
one artist throughout because they're really good and they seem fitting to the whole theme of the book and the aesthetic of the book.
he's fantastic, and I think he's genuinely one of my favorite artists. I am running out of images in my collection. So the other part of this is I use Drive-Through RPG, which usually they distribute games, but they also have a publisher resources section. And so this is where artists will publish their assets, where you can purchase a very affordable license for a piece of art or for
Okay.
graphics. Any graphics you see, any art, either I have had them made or I have purchased or acquired legally the license. Um, Sometimes it can
So now the
feel
cover art for both of these, um, are these done by different people? Are they, what's the
they
story on the
are.
cover art?
So the first cover art I had commissioned back in 2020 for an RPG project that never saw the light of day. So it was burning an $800 hole in my hard drive for many years. And when I started making the magazine, I'm like, this is the perfect kind of art for this. It's really bright and colorful. Let's put it on there. I actually wrote the flash fiction so that there was something that connected to it.
Hmm.
Um, And funny enough, the setting of that story is the setting of the project that never came to be. So it kind of made its way in anyway. The second one is from an artist named Dean Spencer. He's kind of the king of those commercial licenses where he's done work for WotC, he's done work for TSR back in the day. If you don't know who Dean Spencer is, you have still seen his art. Is
Okay.
It's everywhere. And
Yeah. So like Wizards
publishers
of the Coast, like are we talking like magic cards?
that could be. I don't think Magic
Okay.
specifically. I think it's mostly source books for D&D.
Okay.
Um, I can't really tell you exactly where it showed up other than in the community, but for many years, he's the leading artist on Drive Through RPG who sells his work. I mean, he's a pro and he sells the license to full oil paintings for $15. It is These people are a godsend to indie
Hmm.
publishing. We cannot operate without affordable or free art. And there's a lot of less experienced artists who also offer their licenses for affordable prices or for free. I I have a whole archive on my server of just art I've collected over the years, and so summer you'll start seeing some other artists other than Kim Holm, just because like so I'm running out of images that work
Right.
for my niche needs.
But
Um,
I do appreciate that these aren't AI images, that these are human beings who make these.
yes, I use AI for certain things as a small business owner, but never for creativity.
Right.
Um, it's if I'm putting AI art into a book, what am I doing with my life?
That's true.
We don't have to do art. It doesn't, but it adds so much.
Hmm.
The only reason why there isn't art beyond a map in traditionally published fantasy books is because a budget for a book is extremely low. If a cover costs $1,000 to $3,000 and you're only expecting $5,000 of return on that book, most traditionally published books don't even sell 20 copies. It's
Right.
like 95% of them coming from
It's like
Random
under
House.
12.
Yeah, under
Yeah.
12 or something.
Yeah.
So why would you pay an interior artist another $1,000 to make a bunch of line work? But then when you're crafty and care about the artistry of the product, then you can spend the extra time acquiring the licenses, sometimes entirely for free, and putting that stuff in there to give it a little bit more flair, give it something to connect to in a deeper way.
So the next issue then, because I know the second issue kind of just came out. The third issue that is slated for.
Right now, we have two sections of release. There's the bi-weekly online stories, which come out for free on the website, and then we do biannual releases. So winter and summer, July
Okay.
31st, January 31st.
Okay.
I eventually want to do seasonal, but we don't get enough submissions for that yet. We're getting there. We From last year, it was like a struggle to populate the winter issue. Um I had to do some finagling to hit the 110 page count limit because printing cost goes down a lot on Amazon when you hit 110 pages. I had no such issue with Summer 25, and I'm going to have no such issue with Winter because we only need one more story for that one and it's ready to go.
Yeah. So
Um,
I thought in the first issue, that's winter. Yeah, the first one's winter.
yeah, Winter
Um,
25.
yeah, so in the back, I saw there was it almost looks like a playbill. Like you go to Broadway and there's some advertisements in the back for upcoming books, all very appropriate to the magazine, but it makes it feel more having just a couple of advertisements in the back I mean, for very appropriate things. These books are coming soon. Does add something to it. I mean, it adds a couple of pages, but it also adds, I don't know, the spirit of a magazine
Yeah,
is
I think you have one of the more recent printings. But yeah, the ads at the back came as a point of necessity because I had 108 pages and I needed to push it to 110. And
okay.
I thought, what can I add? What can I do? So I started reaching out to people, and my initial idea, of course, was to sell the ad space. And I thought, well, like I'm not a nonprofit, but I'm also not in this business to make it. We've talked about this in the past.
Hmm.
I have a full-time job. I don't need you to purchase my ad space in order to eat my food.
Right.
So all of those things that are back in there, I've placed those for free because I believe in those people. I believe in those projects that are in there. One of them that I'm very proud of is actually a coworker of mine at my daytime job. He manages the retail store that's attached to the corporate office I work in, and he does charity work where he talks with his big project. I think it's called the Rise Above Stories, and he's all about talking with less fortunate people down on their luck who have had a hard time at life and spreading their story, sharing what they've been through and to encourage empathy. And I'm like, that is the exact kind of thing that I want to put in there. I didn't charge him. I approached him. I'd actually written an article about it in our company newsletter. And I went to him and I said, I want to put this in my magazine. Can I put this in my magazine? And he said, yeah, of course. And so I did, and I updated the old one to have it in there when summer came out. And that's my favorite thing we put in there because it's just such
Very
a
good.
selfless humanitarian effort that needs to be known about beyond
Yeah.
the limits of our city.
So altogether, though, beautiful magazines, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Can we talk about your writing, your person, not your like short stories, but your upcoming works?
Yeah.